vegan milk mixture was hot enough. I stirred it adequately. I put it into a preheated cup that holds about half a liter of whatever beverage you put in there, or just in general. Yeah, I mean, a cup is actually never empty. It just depends on how you see it. And then I added the coffee. And now I'm drinking it. And before it gets cold and disgusting, I just want to finish it so I can focus on reading. Because if I'm reading and thinking or worrying about my coffee getting cold, that's about as unpractical as getting to know another woman and worrying about leaving somebody else behind. But we all make our own choices, and it's very important that you make your own choices. So, where were we? The gold coins were calling out to Drin, and just something else. You can literally tell from this story that he didn't really think it all through. He just let it happen as it happened. And I really like that. There's a lot to learn in this story. And I couldn't recommend to you if you don't like me reading, because it's kind of inconsistent. Or maybe you just like that because it's genuine or something, to just read it yourself. The ragged black cloak whipped against Molly's cheek as Schmendrick rolled to his knees, groping desperately for the purse. It buzzed like a rattlesnake in his hand. He hurled it far into the brush, but the three men were running at them together, daggers as red as though they had already struck. Beyond King Haggard's castle, a burning brightness was rising, breaking into the night like a great shoulder. The magician stood erect, menacing the attackers with demons, metamorphoses, paralyzing ailments, and secret judo holds. Molly picked up a rock. With an old, gay, terrible cry of ruin, the unicorn reared out of her hiding place. Her hoofs came slashing down like a rain of razors, her mane raged, and on her forehead she wore a plume of lightning. The three assassins dropped their daggers and hid their faces, and even Molly grew and Schmendrick cowered before her. But the unicorn saw none of them. Mad, dancing, sea-white, she bellowed her challenge again. And the brightness answered her with a bellow like the sound of ice breaking up in the spring. Drin's men fled, stumbling and shrieking. Haggard's castle was on fire, tossing wildly in a sudden cold wind. Molly said aloud, "But it has to be the sea. It's supposed to be." She thought that she could see a window, as far away as it was, and a grey face. Then the Red Bull came. Chapter 8. He was the color of blood, not the springing blood of the heart, but the blood that stirs under an old wound that never really healed. A terrible light poured from him like sweat, and his roar started landslides flowing into one another. His horns were as pale as scars. For one moment the unicorn faced him, frozen as a wave about to break. Then the light of her horn went out, and she turned and fled. The Red Bull bellowed again and leaped down after her. The unicorn had never been afraid of anything. She was immortal, but she could be killed. By a harpy, by a dragon or a chimera. By a stray arrow loosed at a squirrel. But dragons could only kill her. They could never make her forget what she was, or themselves forget that even dead she would still be more beautiful than they. The Red Bull did not know her. and yet she could feel that it was herself he sought, and no white mare. Fear blew her dark then, and she ran away while the bull's raging ignorance filled the sky and spilled over into the valley. Now let me just draw your attention to something here. Like, you may be listening to this book or reading it like a fairy tale, but it is far from that. See, when I read this book, I basically reflect on it. Things that have been a part of my own life. So I am the story. I'm reading to myself what I need to hear. So I'm trying to look for truth and for an insight. And it's not a mistake that I only start with this now, because you have to work for it to get certain insights. So if I would start this audiobook just by reading, just by commenting on it already, no, people have to really want to listen to this. If they don't want to listen to it, they won't find any of the stuff that I'm saying here. And so the unicorn had never been afraid of anything. She was immortal, but she could be killed by a harpy, by a dragon, or a chimera, by a stray arrow loosed at a squirrel. But dragons could only kill her. They could never make her forget what she was, or themselves forget that even dead she would still be more beautiful than they. It was like jealousy, right? A lot of people are jealous of a lot of things. The Red Bull did not know her, and yet she could feel that it was herself he sought, and no white mare. So you could say, if you reflect on it in such a way, there's look at people like Hugh Hefner. He had lots of beautiful young women. Look at porn. People pay money to have really beautiful young girls so that they can fuck them. But they will never have them. They want them, but they don't want to put in the work or the effort. Right? They want a beautiful woman, but they're not prepared to do what it takes to get her. You see, and that's sometimes a problem I have myself. Because if you are following my content, and it's important for me to say that, especially on YouTube, a lot of my videos, I talk about having a wife. Now, I would just like to elaborate quickly on it. Yes, I do believe that there's probably a woman out there that is able to love me. And sometimes I thought I found her. And when I realized it wasn't her, it always took me really a long time to let go of this. And that's something that I'm still working on. And one of the most difficult things for me is opening up to somebody else after a relationship has ended. But sometimes it's simply necessary because too much stuff has happened and you basically crashed the car of your relationship. And you can see that as a sacrifice. You sacrificed the relationship, whether you knew what you were doing or whether you didn't know it, so that both of you could be with other people. But for that you have to let go, and that's just something that I would like to add. Of course it's personal, but that's why when I read this story, all kinds of stuff comes up, because I'm on the verge of letting go of someone, and I feel that it's very hard because I'm still clinging a bit, and it's very hard to let go of the idea you had of someone as a specific person in your life, and then to open up anew and say, you know what, maybe it didn't work out this time, and maybe I thought she was my wife, but maybe I was wrong, and maybe I'm gonna meet somebody else who's an even better fit, but has some of the traits that I liked in the previous one. So it's just keep looking. And then it says, the Red Bull did not know her, and yet she could feel that it was herself he sought, and no white mare. So he wants the essence. The Red Bull. Now, fear blew her dark then, and she ran away while the bull's raging ignorance filled the sky and spilled over into the valley. Ignorance. The bull is ignorant, but he still feels the essence of what the unicorn is. What is ignorance? It's darkness. There are some people who are more lightful and some people who are more dark. Now the red bull is like red in color. He's made of fire. And whether the author of this book was aware of all of these things or he just liked the story to write it in such a way is absolutely unimportant. What is important is that, you know, if you sit down and you start learning about chakras and all kinds of things, about the nature of certain things that has always been there, you were just ignorant of it because you were focusing on other things. And I've realized the more I spend time reflecting on my life and the world that surrounds me, the more I was able to see all kinds of things in all kinds of things that had some kind of meaning to me. And it's always with the purpose to continue and to let go, like to become aware of something and then to think about, do you like it the way it has been in your life or not? If you like it, you know, you try to hone it like a skill, like writing is a skill for me. I'm honing it because I like it. Just like smoking turned out to be something that I like, but I also realized, you know, I don't like smoking tobacco. I like smoking this. It's like I like climbing. So I sacrificed running for climbing. For example, I hate this fucking dog. And that shows me I never want to have a dog. Which is not entirely true. I might have one, but that dog will never be like this one. Because if I hear that dog barking, I want to fucking smash its head in. And bury it somewhere where I can never see it again. Because this dog is completely out of control. And, you know, that's like the nature of things. If a human has a dog, then the human should be in charge of the dog, which means the human should be the alpha, which means a dog should never be allowed to live inside the house, because that's not the dog's place. The dog should be outside, in the garden, in a shack. And when it's time to go for a walk, you go for a walk. Because a dog that lives in the house will get the feeling it's more like a human, which means that dog won't ever know its proper place. That's the way I see it. And I believe dogs should be outside. So anyway, right, there's so many things. You know, why does it make me angry that there's a dog barking? Because the dog doesn't belong here. Because it's, you know, dogs in general shouldn't exist the way they exist. That's what I believe. So it makes me angry. Because that dog shouldn't be here. And now it's disturbing me. You know, red is the color of the root chakra, which is where all the fear and all the anger, this is the kind of, you know, I'm going to smash your head in with a boulder. That's the root chakra. And now if you want to transcend all of that, transcend your fear and your ignorance, that means you have to start working your energy up to your third eye and to higher wisdom. And so the Red Bull is just the counterpart of the unicorn. The unicorn is pure light, it's innocence, and the Red Bull is ignorance, pure ignorance, and ignorance is darkness. So people that are ignorant, they are living in a fog. A lot of people that I spend a lot of time with, they live in a kind of a fog. You may call that depression, you may call it whatever, I call it ignorance. and then there's the light. The coming to light is not better or worse, it's just a different stage in your life. And that means you have to start taking responsibility for your newly earned skills. So beginning to see is a scary process. So you have to start looking, because why are people ignorant? Because they are afraid to look. And that means fear is chasing them around. Right now the unicorn is running away from ignorance. But she could also face it. Because some people, you know, that just want to be in the light, like, oh, you know, I'm spiritual now. Oh. They're vulnerable to fear and darkness because they never learned to incorporate darkness. Because you're not just light or darkness, you're both. You're not higher wisdom or ignorance, you're always both. But in order to realize, because, you know, I'm aware of so many things while I'm ignorant of others. So I can never claim that I know everything. I know what I have to know in any given moment. So right now, all I know is whoever I thought my wife is, you know, was fucking bullshit. That's how it feels like. And that means I'm starting to open up to other women again. Just to see where it's gonna get me. And I don't know, right? I don't know. So I'm ignorant of what's actually going on. You know, I'm just doing what it feels like. And today I had the feeling I wanted to go to the sauna, but I decided against that now. I decided against it. Well, maybe that'll change again. And yeah, there may be other parts that I could talk about now. Just let me quickly pause this. So, ignorance, right? That was all I had to say. The bull's raging ignorance filled the sky and spilled over into the valley. It is the ignorance of us humans that is basically drowning the Amazon rainforest. It's pure ignorance that is just destroying nature. It's the raging ignorance of man that manifests itself in the destruction of everything that is bringing life. Because they want to have it, they want to possess it, they want to own it, and that's why they start to destroy it. But they don't know what to do with it. It's like uncontrolled power, it's raw energy, only they use it for destruction instead of using it to create life and to help it grow. But sometimes it has to be like this. Sometimes you have to burn down a forest so that a new one can arise out of the ashes like a phoenix. So you see, there's a lot to learn. The trees lunged at her and the veered... Oh no, I have to start again. The trees lunged at her and she veered wildly among them. She who slipped so softly through eternity without bumping into anything. Behind her they were breaking like glass in the rush of the Red Bull. He roared once again, and a great branch clubbed her on the shoulder so hard that she staggered and fell. She was up immediately, but now roots humped under her feet as she ran, and others burrowed as busily as moles to cut across the path. Vines struck at her like strangling snakes. Creepers wove webs between the trees. Dead boughs crashed all around her. She fell a second time. The bull's hooves on the earth boomed through her bones, and she cried out. She must have found some way out of the trees, for she was running on the hard, bald plain that lay beyond the prosperous pasture lands of Hexgate. Now she had room to race, and the unicorn is only loping when she leaves the hunter kicking his burst and sinking horse. She moved with the speed of life, winking from one body to another or running down a sword, swifter than anything burdened with legs or wings. Yet without looking back, she knew that the Red Bull was gaining on her, coming like the moon, the sullen, swollen hunter's moon. She could feel the shock of the livid horns in her side, as though he had already struck. Ripe, sharp corn stalks leaned together to make a hedge at her breast, but she trampled them down. Silver wheat fields turned cold and gummy when the bull breathed on them. They dragged at her legs like snow. Still she ran, bleating and defeated, hearing the butterflies' icy chiming. They passed down all the roads long ago, and the Red Bull ran close behind them. He had killed them all. Suddenly the bull was facing her, as though he had been lifted like a chess piece, swooped through the air and sat down again to bar her way. He did not charge immediately, and she did not run. He had been huge when she first fled him, but in the pursuit he had grown so vast that she could not imagine all of him. Now he seemed to curve with the curve of the bloodshot sky, his legs like great whirlwinds, his head rolling like the northern lights. His nostrils wrinkled and rumbled as he searched for her, and the unicorn realized that the Red Bull was blind. If he had rushed her then, she would have met him, tiny and despairing, with her darkened horn, even though he stamped her to pieces. He was swifter than she, better to face him now than to be caught running, but the bull advanced slowly with a kind of sinister daintiness, as though he were trying not to frighten her. And again she broke before him. With low, sad cry, she whirled and ran back the way she had come, back through the tattered fields and over the plain toward King Haggard's castle, dark and hunched as ever, and the Red Bull went after her, following her fear. Schmendrick and Molly had been spun away like chips when the bull went by. Molly slammed breathless and witless against the ground, and the magician hurled into a tangle of thorns that cost him half his cloak and an eighth of his skin. They got up when they could, and went limping in pursuit, leaning on one another. Neither one said a word. The way through the trees was easier for them than the unicorn had found it, for the Red Bull had been there since. Molly and the magician scrambled over great tree trunks, not only smashed but trodden halfway into the ground, and dropped to hands and knees to crawl around crevices they could not fathom in the dark. No hooves could have made these, Molly thought dazedly. The earth had torn itself, shrinking from the burden of the bull. She thought of the unicorn and her heart paled. When they came out of the plain, they saw her, far and faint, a tuft of white water on the wind, almost invisible in the glare of the Red Bull. Molly grew a little crazy with weariness and fear, saw them moving the way stars and stones move through space, forever falling, forever following, forever alone. The Red Bull would never catch the unicorn, not until now, caught up with new, bygone with begin. Molly smiled serenely. But the blazing shadow loomed over the unicorn until the bull seemed to be all around her. She dared, swerved, and sprang away in another direction, only to meet the bull there, his head lowered and his jaws drooling thunder. Again she turned, and again backing and sidling, making crafty little dashes to this side or that, and each time the Red Bull headed her off by standing still. He did not attack, but he left her no way to go save one. He's driving her, Schmendig said quietly. If he wanted to kill her, he could have done it by now. He's driving her the way he drove the others, to the castle, to Haggard. I wonder why. Molly said, "Do something!" Her voice was strangely calm and casual, and the magician answered her in the same tone. "There is nothing I can do." The unicorn fled once more, pitifully tireless, and the Red Bull let her have room to run, but none to turn. When she faced him for a third time, she was close enough for Molly to see her hind legs shivering like those of a frightened dog. Now she set herself to stand, pawing the ground wickedly and laying back her small, lean ears. But she could make no sound, and her horn did not grow bright again. She cowered when the Red Bull's bellow made the sky ripple and crack, and yet she did not back away. "Please," Molly Grew said, "please do something." Schmendrick turned on her, and his face was wild with helplessness. "What can I do? What can I do with my magic? Hat tricks, penny tricks, or the one where I scramble stones to make an omelette? Would that entertain the Red Bull, do you think? Or shall I try the trick with the singing oranges? I'll try whatever you suggest, for I would certainly be happy to be of some practical use." Molly did not answer him. The bull came on, and the unicorn crouched lower and lower until she seemed about to snap in two. Schmendrick said, "I know what you do. I know what to do. If I could, I'd change her into some other creature, some beast too humble for the bull to be concerned with. But only a great magician, a wizard like Nikos, who was my teacher, would have that kind of power. To transform a unicorn, anyone who could do that could juggle the seasons and shuffle years like playing cards. And I have no more power than you have. Less, for you can touch her and I cannot." Then he said suddenly, "Look, it is over." The unicorn was standing very still before the Red Bull, her head down and her whiteness drabbled to a soapy gray. She looked gaunt and small, and even Molly, who loved her, could not keep from seeing that a unicorn is an absurd animal when the shining has gone out of her. Tail like a lion's tail, deer legs, goat feet, the mane cold and fine as foam over my hand. The charred horn, the eyes, oh, the eyes. Molly took hold of Schmendrick's arm and dug her nails into it as hard as she could. "You have magic," she said. She heard her own voice as deep and clear as a sibyl's. "Maybe you can find it, but it's there. You called up Robin Hood, and there is no Robin Hood. But he came, and he was real, and that is magic. You have all the power you need if you dare to look for it." Schmendrick regarded her in silence, staring as hard as though his green eyes were beginning the search for his magic in Molly Grew's eyes. The bull stepped lightly toward the unicorn, no longer pursuing but commanding her with the weight of his presence, and she moved ahead of him, docile, obedient. He followed like a sheepdog, guiding her in the direction of King Haggard's jagged tower in the sea. "Oh, please!" Molly's voice was crumbling now. "Please, it's not fair. It can't be happening. He'll drive her to Haggard and no one will ever see her again. No one. Please, you're a magician. You won't let him." Her fingers struck even deeper into Schmendrick's arm. "Do something," she wept. "Don't let him. Do something." Schmendrick was prying futilely at her clenched fingers. "I'm not going to do a damn thing," he said through his teeth, "until you let go of my arm." "Oh," Molly said, "I'm sorry." "You can cut off the circulation like that, you know," the magician said severely. He rubbed his arm and took a few steps forward into the path of the Red Bull. There he stood with his arms folded and his head high, though it drooped now and then because he was very tired. "Maybe this time," Molly heard him mutter. "Maybe this time," Nico said. What was it that Nico said? I don't remember. It has been so long. There was an odd old sorrow in his voice that Molly had never heard before. Then a gaiety leaped up like a flame as he said, "Well, who knows? Who knows if this is not the time? Perhaps I can make it so. There's this much of comfort, friend Schmendrick. For once I don't see how you can possibly make things any worse than they already are." And he laughed softly. The Red Bull, being blind, took no notice of the tall figure in the road until he was almost upon it. Then he halted, sniffing the air. Storm stirring in his throat, but a certain confusion showing in the swing of his great head. The unicorn stopped when he stopped, and Schmendrick's breath broke to see her so tractable. "Run!" he called to her. "Run now!" But she never looked at him, or back at the bull, or at anything but the ground. At the sound of Schmendrick's voice, the bull's rumble grew louder and more menacing. He seemed eager to be out of the valley with the unicorn, and the magician thought he knew why. Beyond the towering brightness of the Red Bull, he could see 2 or 3 sallow stars, and a cautious hint of a warmer light. Dawn was near. "He doesn't care for daylight," Schmendrick said to himself. "That's worth knowing." Once more he shouted to the unicorn to fly, but his only answer came in the form of a roar like a drum roll. The unicorn bolted forward, and Schmendrick had to spring out of her way, or she would have run him down. Close behind her came the bull, driving her swiftly now as the wind drives the thin torn mist. The power of his passage picked Schmendrick up and dropped him elsewhere, tumbling and rolling to keep from being trampled, his eyes jarred blind and his head full of flames. He thought he heard Molly Grew scream. Scrabbling to one knee, he saw that the Red Bull had herded the unicorn almost to the beginning of the trees. If she would only try one more time to escape, but she was the bull's and not her own. The magician had one glimpse of her, pale and lost between the pale horns, before the wild red shoulders surged across his sight. Then, swaying and sick and beaten, he closed his eyes and let his hopelessness march through him, until something woke somewhere that had wakened in him once before. He cried aloud for fear and joy. What words the magic spoke this second time he never knew surely. They left him like eagles, and he let them go. And when the last one was away, the emptiness rushed back with a thunderclap that threw him on his face. It happened as quickly as that. This time he knew before he picked himself up that the power had been and gone. Ahead the Red Bull was standing still, nosing at something on the ground. Schmendrick could not see the unicorn. He went forward as fast as he could, but it was Molly who first drew near enough to see what the bull was sniffing. She put her fingers in her mouth like a child. At the feet of the Red Bull there lay a young girl, spilled into a very small heap of light and shadow. She was naked, and her skin was the color of snow by moonlight. Fine tangled hair, white as a waterfall, came down almost to the small of her back. Her face was hidden in her arms. "Oh," Molly said, "oh, what have you done?" And heedless of any danger, she ran to the girl and knelt beside her. The Red Bull raised his huge blind head and swung it slowly in Schmendrick's direction. He seemed to be waning and fading as the grey sky grew light, though he still smoldered as savagely bright as crawling lava. The magician wondered what his true size was, and his color when he was alone. Once more the Red Bull snuffled at the still form, stirring it with his freezing breath. Then, without a sound, he bounded away into the trees and was gone from sight in 3 gigantic strides. Schmendrick had a last vision of him as he gained the rim of the valley, no shape at all but a swirling darkness, the red darkness you see when you close your eyes in pain. The horns had become the two sharpest towers of old King Haggard's crazy castle. Molly Grew had taken the white girl's head onto her lap and was whispering over and over, "What have you done?" The girl's face, quiet in sleep and close to smiling, was the most beautiful that Schmendrick had ever seen. It hurt him and warmed him at the same time. Molly soothed the strange hair, and Schmendrick noticed on the forehead, above and between the closed eyes, a small raised mark, darker than the rest of the skin. It was neither a scar nor a bruise. It looked like a flower. "What do you mean, what have I done?" he demanded of the moaning Molly. "Only saved her from the bull by magic, that's what I've done. By magic, woman, by my own true magic." Now he was helpless with delight, for he wanted to dance and he wanted to be still. He shook with shouting and speeches, and yet there was nothing that he wanted to say. He ended by laughing foolishly, hugging himself until he gasped, and sprawling down beside Molly as his legs let go. "Give me your cloak," Molly said. The magician beamed at her, blinking. She reached over and urgently pulled the shredded cloak from his shoulders. Then she wrapped it around the sleeping girl as much as it would wrap. The girl shone through it like the sun through leaves. "Doubtless you are wondering how I plan to return her to a proper shape," Schmendrick offered. "Wonder not. The power will come to me when I need it. I know that much now. One day it will come when I call, but that time is not yet." Impulsively he seized Molly Grew, hugging her head in his long arms. "But you were right," he cried. "You were right. It is there, and it is mine." Molly pulled away from him, one cheek rough red and both ears mashed. The girl sighed in her lap, ceased to smile, turned her face from the sunrise. Molly said, "Schmendrick, you poor man, you magician, don't you see?" "See what? There's nothing to see." But his voice was suddenly hard and weary, and the green eyes were beginning to be frightened. The red bull came for a unicorn, so she had to become something else. "You begged me to change her. What is it frets you now?" Molly shook her head in the wavering way of an old woman. She said, "I didn't know you meant to turn her into a human girl. You would have done better." She did not finish, but looked away from him. One hand continued to stroke the white girl's hair. The magic chose the shape. The magic chose the shape, not I," Schmendrick answered. "A mountebank may select this cheat or that, but a magician is a porter, a donkey carrying his master where he must. The magician calls, but the magic chooses. If it changes a unicorn to a human being, then that was the only thing to do." His face was fevered with an ardent delirium which made him look even younger. "I am a bearer," he sang. "I am dwelling. I am a messenger." "You are an idiot," Molly Grew said fiercely. "Do you hear me? You're a magician, all right, but you're a stupid magician." But the girl was trying to wake, her hands opening and closing and her eyelids beating like birds' breasts. As Molly and Schmendrick looked on, the girl made a soft sound and opened her eyes. They were farther apart than common and somewhat deeper set, and they were as dark as the deep sea and illuminated like the sea by strange glimmering creatures that never rise to the surface. The unicorn could have been transformed into a lizard, Molly thought, or into a shark, a snail, a goose, and somehow still her eyes would have given the change away. To me anyway, I would know. The girl lay without moving, her eyes finding herself in Molly's eyes and in Schmendrick's. Then in one motion she was on her feet. the black cloak falling back across Molly's lap. For a moment she turned in a circle, staring at her hands, which she held high and useless, close to her breast. She bobbed and shambled like an ape doing a trick, and her face was the silly, bewildered face of a joker's victim. And yet she could make no move that was not beautiful. Her trapped terror was more lovely than any joy that Molly had ever seen, and that was the most terrible thing about it. "Donkey," Molly said. "Messenger." "I can change her back," the magician answered hoarsely. "Don't worry about it. I can change her back." Shining in the sun, the white girl hobbled to and fro on her strong young legs. She stumbled suddenly and fell, and it was a bad fall because she did not know how to catch herself with her hands. Molly flew to her, but the girl crouched on the ground, staring at her, and spoke in a low voice. "What have you done to me?" Molly Grew began to cry. Schmendrick came forward, his face cold and wet, but his voice level. "I turned you into a human being to save you from the Red Bull. There was nothing else I could do. I will turn you to yourself again as soon as I can." "The Red Bull," the girl whispered. "Ah!" She was trembling wildly as though something were shaking and hammering at her skin from within. "He was too strong," she said. "Too strong. There was no end to his strength and no beginning. He is older than I." Her eyes widened, and it seemed to Molly that the bull moved in them, crossing their depth like a flaming fish and vanishing. The girl began to touch her face timidly, recoiling from the feel of her own features. Her curled fingers brushed the mark on her forehead, and she closed her eyes and gave a thin, stabbing howl of loss and weariness and utter despair. "What have you done to me?" she cried. "I will die here." She tore at the smooth body, and blood followed her fingers. "I will die here. I will die." Yet there was no fear in her face, though it ramped in her voice, in her hands and feet, in the white hair that fell down over her new body. Her face remained quiet and untroubled. Molly huddled over her as near as she dared, begging her not to hurt herself. But Schmendrick said, "Be still," and the two words cracked like autumn branches. He said, "The magic knew what it was doing. Be still and listen." "Why did you not let the bull kill me?" the white girl moaned. "Why did you not leave me to the harpy? That would have been kinder than closing me in this cage." The magician winced, remembering Molly Grew's mocking accusation, but he spoke with a desperate calmness. "In the first place, it's quite an attractive shape," he said. "You couldn't have done much better and still remained human." She looked at herself, sideways at her shoulders and along her arms, then down her scratched and welting body. She stood on one foot to inspect the soul of the other, cocked her eyes up to see the silver brows, squinted down her cheeks to catch a flash of her nose, and even peered closely at the sea-green veins inside her wrists, themselves as gaily made as young otters. At last she turned her face to the magician, and again he caught his breath. "I have made magic," he thought, but sorrow winked sharp in his throat like a fishhook setting fast. "All right," he said. "It would make no difference to you if I had changed you into a rhinoceros, which is where the whole silly myth got started. But in this guise you have some chance of reaching King Haggard and finding out what has become of your people. As a unicorn you would only suffer their fate, unless you think you could defeat the bull if you met him a second time." The white girl shook her head. "No," she answered, "never. Another time I would not stand so long." Her voice was too soft, as though its bones had been broken. She said, "My people are gone, and I will follow them soon, whatever shape you trap me in. But I would have chosen any other than this for my prison. A rhinoceros is as ugly as a human being, and it too is going to die, but at least it never thinks that it is beautiful." "No, it never thinks that," the magician agreed. That's why it goes on being a rhinoceros and will never be welcome even at Haggard's court. But a young girl, a girl to whom it can never mean anything that she is not a rhinoceros, such a girl, while the king and his sons seek to solve her, might unravel her own riddle until she comes to its end. Rhinoceri are not questing beasts, but young girls are. The sky was hot and curdled, the sun had already melted into a lion-colored puddle. And on the plain of Hex Gate nothing stirred but the stale heavy wind. The naked girl with the flower mark on her forehead stared silently at the green-eyed man, and the woman watched them both. In the tawny morning, King Haggard's castle seemed neither dark nor accursed, but merely grimy, run down and poorly designed. Its skinny spires looked nothing like a bull's horns, but rather like those on a jester's cap, or like the horns of a dilemma, Schmendrick thought. They never have just two. The white girl said, I am myself still. This body is dying. I can feel it rotting all around me. How can anything that is going to die be real? How can it be truly beautiful? Molly Grew put the magician's cloak around her shoulders again, not for modesty or seemliness, but out of a strange pity, as though to keep her from seeing herself. I will tell you a story. I will tell you a story, Schmendrick said. As a child I was apprenticed to the mightiest magician of all, the great Nikos, whom I have spoken of before, but even Nikos, who could turn cats into kettles, snowflakes into blood. But even Nikos, who could turn cats into kettles, snowflakes into snowdrops, and unicorns into men, could not change me into so much as a carnival card shark. At last he said to me, "My son, your ineptitude is so vast, your incompetence so profound, that I am certain you are inhabited by a greater power than I have ever known. Unfortunately, it seems to be working backward at the moment, and even I can find no way to set it right. It must be that you are meant to find your own way to reach your power in time, but frankly, you should live so long as that will take you. Therefore I granted that you shall not age from this day forth, but will travel the world round and round eternally, inefficient, until at last you come to yourself and know what you are. Don't thank me. I tremble at your doom." The white girl regarded him out of the unicorn's clear amaranthine eyes, gentle and frightening in the unused face, but she said nothing. It was Molly Grew who asked, "And if you should find your magic, what then?" "Then the spell will be broken and I will begin to die as I began at my birth. Even the greatest wizards grow old like other men and die." He swayed and nodded and then snapped awake again. A tall, thin, shabby man smelling of dust and drink. "I told you that I was older than I look," he said. "I was born mortal, and I have been immortal for a long, foolish time. And one day I will be mortal again. So I know something that a unicorn cannot know. Whatever can die is beautiful, more beautiful than a unicorn, who lives forever and who is the most beautiful creature in the world. Do you understand me?" "No," she said. The magician smiled warily. "You will. You're in the story with the rest of us now, and you must go with it whether you will or no. If you want to find your people, if you want to become a unicorn again, then you must follow the fairy tale to King Haggard's castle and wherever else it chooses to take you. The story cannot end without the princess." The white girl said, "I will not go." She stepped away, her body weary and the cold hair falling down. She said, "I am no princess, no mortal, and I will not go. Nothing but evil has happened to me since I left my forest, and nothing but evil can have become of unicorns in this country. Give me my true shape again, and I will return to my trees, to my pool, to my own place. Your tale has no power over me. I am a unicorn. I am the last unicorn." Had she said that once before, long ago, in the blue-green silence of the trees? Schmendrick continued to smile, but Molly Grew said, "Change her back. You said you could change her. Let her go home." "I cannot," said the magician answered. "I told you the magic is not mine to command, not yet. That is why I too must go on to the castle and the fate of fortune that waits there. If I tried to undo the transformation now, I might actually turn her into a rhinoceros. That would be the best thing that could happen. As for the worst," he shivered and fell silent. The girl turned from them and looked away at the castle that stooped over the valley. She could see no movement at any window or among the tottering turrets or any sign of the Red Bull. Yet she knew that he was there, brooding at the castle's roots till night should fall again, strong beyond strength, invincible as the night itself. For a second time she touched the place on her forehead where her horn had been. When she turned again, they were asleep where they sat, the man and the woman. Their heads were pillowed on air and their mouth hung open. She stood by them, watching them breathe, one hand holding the black cloak close at her throat. Very faintly, for the first time, the smell of the sea came to her. Chapter 9. The sentinels saw them coming a little before sunset, when the sea was flat and blinding. The sentinels were pacing the second tallest of the many wry towers that sprouted up from the castle and made it resemble one of those odd trees that grow with their roots in the air. From where they stood, the two men could survey the entire valley of Hexgate as far as the town and the sharp hills beyond, as well as the road that ran from the rim of the valley to the great, though sagging, front gate of King Erget's castle. "A man and two women," said the first sentinel. He hurried to the far side of the tower, his stomach startling motion since the tower tilted so that half of the sentinel sky was sea. The castle sat on the edge of a cliff which dropped like a knife blade to a thin yellow shore. frayed bare over green and black rocks. Soft baggy birds squatted on the rocks, snickering, "Sitzo, sitzo!" The second man followed his comrade across the tower at an easier pace, he said. A man and a woman, the third one in the cloak. I'm not certain of the third. Both men were clad in homemade mail, rings, bottle caps, and links of chains sewn onto half-cured hides, and their faces were invisible behind rusted visors, but the second sentinel's voice and gait alike marked him as the elder. "The one in the black cloak," he said again. "Do not be too sure of that one too soon." But the first sentinel leaned out into the orange glare of the tipped-up sea, scraping a few studs loose from his poor armor on the parapet. "It is a woman," he declared. "I would doubt my own sex before hers." "And well you may," the other observed sardonically, "since you do nothing that becomes a man, but rides astraddle. I warn you again, be slow to call that third male or female. Wait a little and see what you see." "And well you may," the other observed sardonically, "since you do nothing that becomes a man but ride astraddle. I warn you again, be slow to call that third male or female. Wait a little and see what you see." The first sentinel answered him without turning. "If I had grown up never dreaming that there were two separate secrets to the world, if I had taken every woman I met to be exactly like myself, still I would know that this creature was different from anything I had ever seen before. I have always been sorry that I have never pleased you, but now when I look at her, I am sorry that I have never pleased myself. Oh, I am sorry." He bent still further over the wall, straining his eyes toward the three slow figures on the road. A chuckle clattered behind his visor. "The other woman looks sore-footed and bad-tempered," he reported. "The man appears an amiable sort, though plainly of the strolling life, a minstrel like enough for a player." He said nothing more for a long while, watching them draw near. "And the third?" the older man inquired presently. "Your sundown Fanthy with the interesting hair. Have you outworn her in a quarter of an hour, already seen her closer than love dares?" His voice rustled in his helmet like small clawed feet. "I don't think I could ever see her closely," the sentinel replied. "However close she came, I don't know who's who, fucking hell, doesn't matter. However close she came, his own voice was hushed and regretful, echoing with lost chances. She has a newness," he said. "Everything is for the first time. See how she moves, how she walks, how she turns her head, all for the first time anyone has ever done these things. See how she draws her breath and lets it go again, as though no one else in the world knew that air was good. It is all for her. If I learned that she had been born this very morning, I would only be surprised that she was so old." The second sentinel stared down from his tower at the three wanderers. The tall man saw him first, and next the dour woman. Their eyes reflected nothing but his armor, grim and cankered and empty. But then the girl in the ruined black cloak raised her head, and he stepped back from the parapet, putting out one tin glove against her glance. In a moment she passed into the shadow of the castle with her companions, and he lowered his hand. "She may be mad," he said calmly. "No grown girl looks like that unless she's mad. That would be annoying, but far preferable to the remaining possibility." "Which is?" the younger man prompted after a silence. which is that she was indeed born this morning. I would rather that she were mad. Let us go down now." When the man and the woman reached the castle, the 2 sentries were standing on either side of the gate, their blunt band halberds crossed and their falchions hitched round in front of them. The sun had gone down, and their absurd armor grew steadily more menacing as the sea faded. The travelers hesitated, looking at one another. They had no dark castle at their backs, and their eyes were not hidden. "Give your names," said the parched voice of the second sentinel. The tall man stepped a pace forward. "I am Schmendrick, the magician," he said. "This is Molly Grew, my helper, and this is the Lady Amalthea." He stumbled over the name of the white girl, as though he had never before spoken it. "We seek audience with King Haggard," he continued. "We have come a long way to see him." The second sentinel waited for the first to speak, but the younger man was looking only at the Lady Amalthea. Impatiently he said, "State your business with King Haggard." "I will," the magician replied. "To Haggard himself. What kind of royal matter could it be that I might confide to doorman and porters? Take us to the king." "What kind of royal matter could a wandering wizard with a foolish tongue have to discuss with King Haggard?" the second sentinel asked somberly. But he turned and strode through the castle gate, and the king's visitors straggled after him. Last wandered the younger sentinel, his step grown as tender as that of the Lady Amalthea, whose every movement he imitated unaware. She stayed a moment before the gate, looking out to sea, and the sentinel did the same. His former comrade called angrily to him, but the young sentry was on a different duty, answerable to a new captain for his derelictions. He entered at the gate only after the Lady Amalthea had chosen to go in. Then he followed, singing to himself in a dreamy drone. "What is happening? What is it that is happening to me? What is it? What is it that is..." I don't know his voice. "What is it that is happening to me? I cannot tell whether to be glad or be afraid. What is it that is happening to me?" They crossed a cobbled courtyard where cold laundry groped their faces and passed through a smaller door into a hall so vast that they could not see the walls or the ceiling in the darkness. Great stone pillars rushed up to them as they trudged across the hall, and then leaned away without ever really letting themselves be seen. Breath echoed in that huge place, and the footsteps of other smaller creatures sounded just as clearly as their own. Molly Grew stayed quite close to Schmendrick. After the great hall there came another door, and then a thin stair. There were few windows and no lights. The stair coiled tighter and tighter as it ascended, until it seemed that every step turned round on itself, and that the tower was closing on them all like a sweaty fist. The darkness looked at them and touched them. It had a rainy, doggy smell. Something rumbled somewhere deep and near. The tower trembled like a ship run aground, and answered with a low stone wail. The 3 travelers cried out, scrambling to keep their feet on the shuddering stairs, but their guide pressed on without faltering or speaking. The younger man whispered earnestly to the Lady Amalthea, "It's all right, don't be afraid, it's just the bull." The sound was not repeated. The second sentinel halted abruptly, produced a key from a secret place and jabbed it, apparently, straight into the blank wall. A section of the wall swung inward, and the small procession filed into a low, narrow chamber with one window and a chair at the far end. There was nothing else. No other furnishings, no rug, no draperies, no tapestries. In the room were 5 people, the tall chair, and the mealy light of the rising new moon. "This is King Haggard's throne room," said the sentinel. The magician gripped him by his mailed elbow and turned him until they faced each other. This is a cell. This is a tomb. No living king sits here. Take us to Haggard if he is alive. You must judge that for yourself, replied the scurrying voice of the sentinel. He unlaced his helmet and lifted it from his grey head. I am King Haggard, he said. His eyes were the same color as the horns of the Red Bull. He was taller than Schmendrick, and though his face was bitterly lined, there was nothing fond or foolish in it. It was a pike's face, the jaws long and cold, the cheeks hard, the lean neck alive with power. He might have been 70 years old, or 80 or more. The first sentinel came forward now, with his own helmet under his arm. Molly Grew gasped when she saw his face, for it was the friendly, rumpled face of the young prince, who had read a magazine while his princess tried to call a unicorn. King Haggard said, This is Lear. Hi, said Prince Lear. Glad to meet you. His smile wriggled at their feet like a hopeful puppy, but his eyes, a deep shadowy blue behind stubby lashes, rested quietly on the eyes of the Lady Amalthea. She looked back at him, silent as a jewel, seeing him no more truly than men see unicorns. But the prince felt strangely, happily certain that she had looked him round and through and down into caverns that he had never known were there, where her glance echoed and sang. Prodigies began to waken somewhere southwest of his 12th rib, and he himself, still mirroring the Lady Amalthea, began to shine. What is your concern with me? Schmendrick the magician cleared his throat and bowed to the pale-eyed old man. We seek to enter your service. Far and wide has the fabled court of King Haggard. I need no servants, the king turned away, his face and body sullenly slack with indifference. Yet Schmendrick sensed the curiosity lingering in the stone-colored skin and at the roots of the grey hair. He said cautiously, But surely you keep some suit, some following. Simplicity is the richest adornment of a kin, I grant you, but for such a king as Haggard, you are losing my interest, the rustling voice interrupted him again, and that is very dangerous. In a moment I will have forgotten you quite entirely and will never be able to remember just what I did with you. What I forget not only ceases to exist, but never really existed in the first place. As he said this, his eyes, like those of his son, turned to meet the Lady Amalthea's eyes. My court, he continued, since you choose to call it that, consists of 4 men-at-arms. I would do without them if I could, for they cost more than they are worth, like everything else. But they take their turns as sentries and as cooks, and they give the appearance of an army from a distance. What other attendants should I need? But the pleasures of court, the magician cried, the music, the talk, the women and the fountains, the hunts and the masks and the great feasts. They are nothing to me, King Haggard said. I have known them all, and they have not made me happy. I will keep nothing near me that does not make me happy. The Lady Amalthea moved quietly past him to the window and looked out at the night sea. Schmendrick came about to catch the wind again and declared, I understand you perfectly. How weary, stale, flat, and unprofitable seem to you all the uses of this world. You are bored with bliss, satiated with sensation, jaded with jejune joys. It is a king's affliction, and therefore no one wants the services of a magician more than a king does. For only to a magician is the world forever fluid, infinitely mutable and eternally new. Only he knows the secret of change. Only he knows truly that all things are crouched in eagerness to become something else. And it is from this universal tension that he draws his power. To a magician, March is May, snow is green, and grass is gray. This is that, or whatever you say. Get a magician today. he finished on one knee with both arms flung wide. King Haggard stepped nervously away from him, muttering, get up, you make my head hurt. Besides, I already have a royal magician." Schmendrick rose heavily to his feet, his face red and empty. "You never said what is his name." "He is called Mabruk," King Haggard replied. "I do not often speak of him. Even my men-at-arms do not know that he lives here in the castle. Mabruk is all that you have said a wizard should be, and much more than I doubt you dream of. He is known in his trade as the magician's magician. I can see no reason to replace him with some vagrant, nameless, clownish—" "Ah, but I can," Schmendrick broke in desperately. "I can think of one reason, uttered by you yourself not a minute since. This marvelous Mabruk does not make you happy." Over the king's fierce face there fell a slow shadow of disappointment and betrayal. For a breath he looked like a bewildered young man. "Why, no, that is true," King Haggard murmured. "Mabruk's magic has not delighted me for a long time. How long has it been, I wonder?" He clapped his hands briskly, crying out, "Mabruk! Mabruk, appear, Mabruk!" "I am here," said a deep voice from the far corner of the room. An old man in a dark spangled gown and a pointed spangled hat was standing there. And no one could say surely that he had not been standing there in plain sight since they entered the throne room. His beard and brows were white, and the cast of his face was mild and wise, but his eyes were as hard as hailstones. "What does your majesty wish of me?" "Mabruk," King Haggard said, "this gentleman is of your fraternity. His name is Schmendrick." The old wizard's icy eyes widened slightly, and he peered at the shabby man. "Why, so it is," he exclaimed in seeming pleasure. "Schmendrick, my dear boy, how nice to see you. You won't remember me, but I was a dear, dear friend of your tutor, dear old Nikos. He had such high hopes for you, the poor man. Well, this is a surprise. And are you really still in the profession? My, you're a determined fellow. I always say perseverance is 9/10 of an art. Not that it's much help to be 9/10 an artist, of course, but what can it be that brings you here?" "He has come to take your place." King Haggard's voice was flat and final. "He is now my royal magician." Schmendrick's start of amazement was not lost on old Mabruk, though the wizard himself seemed little surprised by the king's decision. For a moment he obviously considered the worth of wrath, but instead he chose a tone of genuine amusement. "As your majesty wills it, now and always," he purred. "But perhaps your majesty might be interested in learning a bit of the history of his new magician. I'm sure dear Schmendrick won't mind my mentioning that he's already something of a legend in the trade. Indeed, among adepts he is best remembered as Nikos' Folly, his charming and complete inability to master the simplest rune, his creative way with the most childish rhyme of thirgy, let alone—" King Haggard made a thin motion with the edge of one hand, and Mabruk was suddenly silent. Prince Lear giggled. The king said, "I do not need to be persuaded of his unfitness for the position. A single glance at him tells me that, as a glance makes it plain that you are one of the great wizards of the world." Mabruk swelled gently, fondling his glorious beard and wrinkling his benign brow. "But that also is nothing to me," King Haggard went on. "In the past you have performed whatever miracle I required of you, and all it has done has been to spoil my taste for miracles. No task is too vast for your powers, and yet, when the wonder is achieved, nothing has changed. It must be that great power cannot give me whatever it is that I really want. A master magician has not made me happy. I will see what an incompetent one can do. You may go, Mabruk." He nodded his head to dismiss the old wizard. Mabruk's semblance of affability vanished like a spark on snow, and with the same sound, his whole face became like his eyes. "I am not packed off
off as easily as that, he said very softly. Not on a whim, even a king's whim, and not in favor of a fool. Beware, Haggard, Mabruk is no one to anger lightly.
A wind began to rise in the dark chamber. It came as much from one place as another, through the window, through the half-open door. But its true source was the clenched figure of the wizard. The wind was cold and rank, a wet, hooty Moorish wind, and it leaped here and there in the room like a gleeful animal, discovering the flimsiness of human beings. Molly Grew shrank against Schmendrick, who looked uncomfortable. Prince Lear fidgeted his sword in and out of its sheath. Even King Haggard gave back a step before the triumphant grin of old Mabruk. The walls of the room seemed to thaw and run away, and the withered, starry gown became the huge, howling night. Mabruk spoke no word himself, but the wind was beginning to make a wicked, grunting sound as it gained strength. In another moment it would become visible, burst into shape. Schmendrick opened his mouth, but if he were shouting a counterspell, it could not be heard, and it did not work. In the darkness, Molly Grew saw the Lady Amalthea turning far away, stretching out a hand on which the ring and middle fingers were of equal length. The strange place on her forehead was glowing as bright as a flower. Then the wind was gone, as though it had never been, and the stone worlds were around them once more. The dull chamber as gay as noon after Mabruk's night. The wizard was crouched almost to the floor, staring at the Lady Amalthea. His wise, benevolent face looked like the face of a drowned man, and his beard dripped thinly from his chin like stagnant water. Prince Lear took him by the arm. "Come on, old man," he said not unkindly. "This way out, Granddad. I'll write you a reference."
"I am going," Mabruk said, "not from fear of you, you lump of stale dough, nor of your mad, ungrateful father, nor of your new magician. Much happiness may you have of him."
His eyes met King Haggard's hungry eyes, and he laughed like a goat.
"Haggard, I would not be you for all the world," he declared. "You have let your doom in by the front door, though it will not depart that way. I would explain myself more fully, but I am no longer in your service. That is a pity, for there will come a time when none but the master will be able to save you, and in that hour you will have Schmendrick to call upon. Farewell, poor Haggard, farewell."
Still laughing, he disappeared, but his mirth dwelled forever in the corners of that chamber, like the smell of smoke or of old cold dust. "Well," said King Haggard in the grey moonlight. "Well," he came slowly toward Schmendrick and Molly, his feet silent, his head weaving almost playfully. "Stand still," he commanded when they moved. "I want to see your faces." His breath rasped like a knife on a grindstone as he peered from one of them to the other. "Closer," he grumbled, squinting through the dark. "Come closer, closer, I want to see you." "Light a light then."
"Light,
"Light a light then," said Molly Grew. The calmness of her own voice frightened her, more than the fury of the old wizard had. It is easy to be brave for her sake, she thought, but if I begin being brave on my own account, where will it end? "I never light lights," the king replied. What is the good of light?" He turned from them, muttering to himself. "One face is almost guileless, almost foolish, but not quite foolish enough. The other is a face like my face, and that must mean danger. Yet I saw all that at the gate. Why did I let them enter then? Mabruk was right, I have grown old and daft and easy. Still I see only Haggard when I look in their eyes." Prince Lear stirred nervously as the king paced across the throne room toward the Lady Amalthea. She was again gazing out of the window, and King Haggard had drawn very near before she wheeled swiftly, lowering her head in a curious manner. "I will not touch you," he said, and she stood still. "Why do you linger at the window?" he demanded. "What are you looking at?" I am looking at the sea, said the Lady Amalthea. Her voice was low and tremorous, not with fear but with life, as a new butterfly shivers in the sun. Ah, said the king. Yes, the sea is always good. There is nothing that I can look at for very long except the sea. Yet he stared at the Lady Amalthea's face for a long time, his own face giving back none of her light, as Prince Lear's had, but taking it in and keeping it somewhere. His breath was as musty as the wilderness wind, but the Lady Amalthea never moved. Suddenly he shouted, What is the matter with your eyes? They are full of green leaves, crowded with trees and streams and small animals. Where am I? Why can I not see myself in your eyes? The Lady Amalthea did not answer him. King Haggard swung around to face Schmendrick and Molly. His scimitar's smile laid its cold edge along their throats. Who is she? He demanded. Schmendrick coughed several times. The Lady Amalthea is my niece, he offered. I am her only living relative and so her guardian. No doubt the state of her attire puzzles you, but it is easily explained. On our journey we were attacked by bandits and robbed of all... What nonsense are you jabbering? What about her attire? The king turned again to regard the white girl. And Schmendrick suddenly understood that neither King Haggard nor his son had noticed that she was naked under the rags of his cloak. The Lady Amalthea held herself so gracefully that she made shreds and tatters seem the only fitting dress for a princess. And besides, she did not know that she was naked. It was the armored king who seemed bare before her. King Haggard said, What she wears, what may have befallen you, what you all are to another, these things are fortunately no concern of mine. In such matters you may lie to me as much as you dare. I want to know who she is. I want to know how she broke Mabrouk's magic without saying a word. I want to know why there are green leaves and foxcups in her eyes. Speak quickly and avoid the temptation to lie, especially about the green leaves. Answer me. Schmendrick did not reply quickly. He made a few small sounds of an earnest nature, but not a sensible word was among them. Molly Grew gathered her courage to answer, even though she suspected that it was impossible to speak the truth to King Haggard. Something in his winter presence blighted all words, tangled meanings, and bent honest intentions into shapes as tormented as the towers of his castle. Still she would have spoken, but another voice was heard in the gloomy chamber. The light, kind, silly voice of the young Prince Lear. Father, what difference does it make? She is here now. King Haggard sighed. It was not a gentle sound, but low and scraping. Not a sound of surrender, but the rumbling meditation of a tiger taught to spring. Of course you are right, he said. She is here. They are all here. And whether they mean my doom or not, I will look at them for a while. A pleasant air of disaster attends them. Perhaps that is what I want. To Schmendrick he said curtly, As my magician you will entertain me when I wish to be entertained, in manners variously profound and frivolous. You will be expected to know when you are required, and in what guise, for I cannot be forever identifying my moods and desires for your benefit. You will receive no wages, since that is certainly not what you came here for. As for your drab, your assistant, whatever you choose to call her, she will serve me also if she wishes to remain in my castle. From this evening she is cook and maidservant together, scrubwoman and scullery maid as well. He paused, seemingly waiting for Molly to protest, but she only nodded. The moon had moved away from the window, but Prince Lear could see that the dark room was no darker for that. The cool brightness of the Lady Amalthea grew more slowly than had Mabrouk's wind, but the prince understood quite well that it was far more dangerous. He wanted to write poems by that light, and he had never wanted to write poems before. You may come and go as you please, said King Haggard to the Lady Amalthea. It may have been foolish of me to admit you, but I am not so foolish as to forbid you this door or that. My secrets guard themselves. Will yours do the same? What are you looking at?
I am looking at the sea, the Lady Amalthea replied again.
Yes, the sea is always good, said the king. We will look at it together one day.
He walked slowly to the door.
I will be curious, he said, to have a creature in the castle whose presence causes Lur to call me father for the first time since he was 5 years old.
6, said Prince Lear. I was 6.
5 or 6, the king said. It had stopped making me happy long before, and it does not make me happy now. Nothing has yet changed because she is here.
He was gone almost as silent as Mabruk, and they heard his tin boots ticking on the stairs. Molly Grew went softly to the Lady Amalthea and stood by her at the window. What is it? She asked. What do you see? Schmendrick leaned on the throne regarding Prince Lear with his long green eyes. Away in the valley of Hexgate, the cold roar sounded again. I will find quarters for you, said Prince Lear. Are you hungry? I will get you something to eat. I know where there is some cloth, fine satin. You could make a dress. No one answered him. The heavy night swallowed his words, and it seemed to him that the Lady Amalthea neither heard nor saw him. She did not move, and yet he was certain that she was going away from him as he stood there like the moon. Let me help you, Prince Lear said. What can I do for you? Let me help you. Chapter 10. What can I do for you? Prince Lear asked. Nothing very much just now, Molly Grew said. The water was all I needed, unless you want to peel the potatoes, which would be all right with me. No, I didn't mean that. I mean, yes, I will if you want me to, but I was talking to her. I mean, when I talk to her, that's what I keep asking. Sit down and peel a few potatoes, Molly said. I'll give you something to do with your hands. They were in the scullery, a dank little room smelling strongly of rotting turnips and fermenting beets. A dozen earthenware dishes were piled in one corner, and a very small fire was shivering under a tripod, trying to boil a large pot of grey water. Molly sat at a rude table which was covered with potatoes, leeks, onions, peppers, carrots, and other vegetables, most of them limp and spotty. Prince Lear stood before her, rocking slowly along his feet and twisting his big, soft fingers together. I killed another dragon this morning, he said presently. That's nice, Molly answered. That's fine. How many does that make now? 5. This one was smaller than the others, but it really gave me more trouble. I couldn't get near it on foot, so I had to go in with the lance, and my horse got pretty badly burned. It was funny about the horse. Molly interrupted him. Sit down, your highness, and stop doing that. I start to twitch all over just watching you. Prince Lear sat down opposite her. He drew a dagger from his belt and moodily began peeling potatoes. Molly regarded him with a slight slow smile. I brought her the head, he said. She was in her chamber, as she usually is. I dragged that head all the way up the stairs to lay it at her feet. He sighed and nicked his finger with the dagger. Damn, I didn't mind that. All the way up the stairs it was a dragon's head, the proudest gift anyone can give anyone. But when she looked at it, suddenly it became a sad, battered mess of scales and horns, gristly tongue, bloody eyes.
I felt like some country butcher who had brought his lass a nice chunk of fresh meat as a token of his love. Then she looked at me and I was sorry I had killed the thing. Sorry for killing a dragon. He slashed at a rubbery potato and wounded himself again. Cut away from yourself, not toward, Molly advised him. You know, I really think you could stop slaying dragons for the Lady Amalthea. If 5 of them haven't moved her, 1 more isn't likely to do it. Try something else. But what's left on Earth that I haven't tried? Prince Lear demanded. I have swum 4 rivers, each in full flood and none less than a mile wide. I have climbed 7 mountains never before climbed. Slept 3 nights in the marsh of the hanged men, and walked alive out of that forest where the flowers burn your eyes and the nightingales sing poison. I have ended my betrothal to the princess I had agreed to marry, and if you don't think that was a heroic deed, you don't know her mother. I have vanquished exactly 15 black knights waiting by 15 fords in their black pavilions, challenging all who come to cross. And I've long since lost count of the witches in the thorny woods, the giants, the demons disguised as damsels, the glass hills, fatal riddles and terrible tasks, the magic apples, rings, lamps, potions, swords, cloaks, boots, neckties and nightcaps, not to mention the winged horses, the basilisks and sea serpents and all the rest of the livestock. He raised his head and the dark blue eyes were confused and sad. And all for nothing, he said. I cannot touch her, whatever I do. For her sake I have become a hero. I, sleepy Lur, my father's sport and shame, but I may just as well have remained the dull fool I was. My great deeds mean nothing to her. Molly took up her own knife and began to slice the peppers. Then perhaps the Lady Amalthea is not to be won by great deeds. The prince stared at her, frowning in puzzlement. Is there another way to win a maiden? He asked earnestly. Molly, do you know another way? Will you tell it to me? He leaned across the table to seize her hand. I like being brave well enough, but I will be a lazy coward again if you think that would be better. The sight of her makes me want to do battle with all evils and ugliness, but it also makes me want to sit still and be unhappy. What should I do, Molly? I don't know, she said, suddenly embarrassed. Kindness, courtesy, good works, that sort of thing. A good sense of humor. A small copper and ashes cat with a crooked ear jumped into her lap, purring thunderously and leaning against her hand. Hoping to change the subject, she asked, What about your horse? What was funny? But Prince Lear was staring at the little cat with the crooked ear. Where did he come from? Is he yours? No, Molly said. I just feed him and hold him sometimes. She stroked the cat's thin throat and it closed its eyes. I thought he lived here. The prince shook his head. My father hates cats. He said that there is no such thing as a cat. It is just a shape that all manner of imps, hobs, and devilkins like to put on to gain easy entrance into the homes of men. He would kill it if he knew you had it here. What about the horse? Molly asked. Prince Lear's face grew glum again. That was strange. When she took no delight in the gift itself, I thought she might be interested to hear how it was won. So I told her about the view and the charge, about the hissing and the naked wings and the way dragons smell, especially on a rainy morning, and the way the black blood jumped at the point of my lance. But she heard none of it, not a word, until I spoke of the rush of fire that nearly burned my poor horse legs from under him. Then she came back from wherever she goes when I talked to her, and she thought that she must go and see my horse, so I led her to the stable where the poor brute stood crying with the pain, and she put her hand on him, on his legs, and he stopped moaning. That's a terrible sound they make when they're really hurt. When they stop, it's like a song. The prince's dagger lay glittering among the potatoes. Outside, great gusts of rain growled round and round the castle walls. But those in the scullery could only hear it, for there was not a single window in the cold room, nor was there any light except for the meager glow of the cooking fire. It made the cat dozing in Molly's lap look like a heap of autumn leaves.
And what happened then, she asked, when the Lady Amalthea touched your horse?
Nothing happened. Nothing at all. Prince Lear suddenly seemed to become angry. He slammed his hand down on the table and leeks and lentils leaped in all directions. Did you expect something to happen? She did. Did you expect the beast burns to heal on the instant, the crackling skin to let the black flesh to be whole again? She did. By my hope of her, I swear it. And when his legs didn't grow well under her hand, then she ran away. I don't know where she is now. His voice softened as he spoke, and the hand on the table curled sadly on its side. He rose and went to look into the pot over the fire. It's boiling, he said. If you want to put the vegetables in. She wept when my horse's legs did not heal. I heard her weeping, and yet there were no tears in her eyes when she ran away. Everything else was there, but no tears. Molly put the cat gently on the floor and began gathering the venerable vegetables for the pot. Prince Lear watched her as she moved back and forth. Around the table and across the dewy floor she was singing. If I dance with my feet as I danced in my dreaming, as graceful and gleaming as death in the skies, oh, that would be sweet. But then would I hunger to be 10 years younger, or wedded, or wise? The prince said, Who is she, Molly? What kind of woman is it who believes? Who knows? For I saw her face that she can cure wounds with a touch, and when weeps without tears. Molly went on about her work, still humming to herself. Any woman can weep without tears, she answered over her shoulder, and most can heal with their hands. It depends on the wound. She is a woman, your highness, and that's riddle enough. But the prince stood up to bar her way, and she stopped, her apron full of herbs and her hair trailing into her eyes. Prince Lear's face bent toward her, older by 5 dragons, but handsome and silly still. He said, You sing. My father sets you to the weariest work there is to do, and still you sing. There has never been singing in this castle, or cats, or the smell of good cooking. It is the Lady Amalthea who causes this, and she causes me to ride out in the morning seeking danger. I was always a fair cook, Molly said mildly, living in the greenwood with Cully and his man for 17 years. Prince Lear continued as though she had not spoken. I want to serve her as you do, to help her find whatever she has come here to find. I wish to be whatever she has most need of. Tell her so. Will you tell her so? Even as he spoke, a soundless step sounded in his eyes, and the sigh of a satin gown troubled his face. The Lady Amalthea stood in the doorway. A season in King Haggard's chill domain had not dimmed or darkened her. Rather, the winter had sharpened her beauty until it invaded the beholder like a barbed arrow that could not be withdrawn. Her white hair was caught up with a blue ribbon, and her gown was lilac. It did not fit her well. Molly Grew was an indifferent seamstress, and satin made her nervous. But the Lady Amalthea seemed more lovely for the poor work, for the cold stones and the smell of turnips. There was rain in her hair. Prince Lear bowed to her, a quick, crooked bow, as though someone had hit him in the stomach. My lady, he mumbled, you really should cover your head when you go out, this weather. The Lady Amalthea sat down at the table, and the little autumn-colored cat immediately sprang up before her, purring swiftly and very softly. She put out her hand, but the cat slid away, still purring. He did not appear frightened, but he would not let her touch his rusty fur. The Lady Amalthea beckoned, and the cat wriggled all over like a dog, but he would not come near. Prince Lear said hoarsely, I must go. There is an ogre of some sort devouring village maidens 2 days' ride from here. It is said that he can be slain only by one who wields the great axe of Duke Alban. Unfortunately, Duke Alban himself was one of the first consumed. He was dressed as a village maiden at the time to deceive the monster, and there is little doubt who holds the great axe now. If I do not return, think of me. Farewell. Farewell, your highness, Molly said. The prince bowed again and left the scullery on his noble errand. He looked back only once. "You are cruel to him," Molly said. The Lady Amalthea did not look up. She was offering her open palm to the crook-eared cat, but he stayed where he was, shivering with the desire to go to her. "Cruel?" she asked. "How can I be cruel? That is for mortals." But then she did raise her eyes, and they were great with sorrow, and with something very near to mockery she said, "So is kindness." Molly busied herself with the cooking pot, stirring the soup and seasoning it, bustling numbly. In a low voice she remarked, "You might give him a you might give him a gentle word. At the very least, he has undergone mighty trials for you." "But what word shall I speak?" asked the Lady Amalthea. "I have said nothing to him, yet every day he comes to me with more heads, more horns and hides and tails, more enchanted jewels and bewitched weapons. What will he do if I speak?" Molly said, He wishes you to think of him. Knights and princes know only one way to be remembered. It's not his fault. I think he does very well." The Lady Amalthea turned her eyes to the cat again. Her long fingers twisted at a seam of the satin gown. "No, he does not want my thoughts," she said softly. "He wants me, as much as the Red Bull did, and with no more understanding. But he frightens me even more than the Red Bull, because he has a kind heart. No, I will never speak a promising word to him." The pale mark on her brow was invisible in the gloom of the scullery. She touched it and then drew her hand away quickly, as though the mark hurt her. "The horse died," she said to the little cat. "I could do nothing." Molly turned quickly and put her hands on the Lady Amalthea's shoulders. Beneath the sleek cloth, the flesh was cold and hard as any stone of King Haggard's castle. Oh my lady," she whispered, "that is because you are out of your true form. When you regain yourself, it will all return. All your power, all your strength, all your sureness. It will come back to you." Had she dared, she would have taken the white girl in her arms and lulled her like a child. She had never dreamed of such a thing before. But the Lady Amalthea answered, "The magician gave me only the semblance of a human being, the seeming but not the spirit. If I had died then, I would still have been a unicorn. The old man knew, the wizard. He said nothing to spite Haggard, but he knew." Of itself her hair escaped the blue ribbon and came hurrying down her neck and over her shoulders. The cat was all but won by this eagerness. He lifted a paw to play with it, but then he drew back once more and sat on his haunches. Tail curled around his front feet, queer head to the side. His eyes were green, speckled with gold. "But that was long ago," the girl said. "Now I am two, myself and this other that you call my lady. For she is here as truly as I am now, though once she was only a veil over me. She walks in the castle, she sleeps, she dresses herself, she takes her meals, and she thinks her own thoughts. If she has no power to heal or to quiet, still she has another magic. Men speak to her saying, 'Lady Amalthea,' and she answers them, or she does not answer. The king is always watching her out of his pale eyes, wondering what she is, and the king's son wounds himself with loving her and wonders who she is. And every day she searches the sea and the sky, the castle and the courtyard, the keep and the king's face, for something she cannot always remember. What is it that she is seeking in this strange place? She knew a moment ago, but she has forgotten." She turned her face to Molly Grew, and her eyes were not the unicorn's eyes. They were lovely still, but in a way that had a name, as a human woman is beautiful. Their depth could be sounded and learned, and their degree of darkness was quite describable. Molly saw fear and loss and bewilderment when she looked into them and herself and nothing more. "Unicorns," she said. "The Red Bull has driven them all away." "Unicorns," she said. "The Red Bull has driven them all away, all but you.
You are the last unicorn. You came here to find the others and to set them free, and so you will.
Slowly the deep secret sea returned to the Lady Amalthea's eyes, filling them until they were as old and dark and unknowable and indescribable as the sea. Molly watched it happen and was afraid, but she gripped the bowed shoulders even more tightly, as though her hands could draw despair like a lightning rod. And as she did so, there shivered in the scullery floor a sound she had heard before, a sound like great teeth, molars grinding together. The Red Bull was turning in his sleep. I wonder if he dreams, Molly thought. The Lady Amalthea said, I must go to him. There is no other way, and no time to spare. In this form of my own, I must face him again. Even if all my people are dead and there is nothing to be saved, I must go to him before I forget myself forever. But I do not know the way, and I am lonely. The little cat switched his tail and made an odd sound that was neither a meow nor a purr.
I will go with you, Molly said. I don't know the way down to the bull either, but there must be one. Schmendrick will come too. He'll make the way for us if we can't find it.
I hope for no help from the magician, the Lady Amalthea replied disdainfully. I see him every day playing the fool for King Haggard, amusing him by his failures, by blundering at even the most trifling trick. He says that it is all he can do until his power speaks in him again. But it never will. He is no magician now, but the king's clown. Molly's face suddenly hurt her, and she turned away to inspect the soup again. Answering past the sharpness in her throat, she said,
He is doing it for you. While you brood and mope and become someone else, he jigs and jests for Haggard, diverting him so that you may have time to find your folk, if they are to be found. But it cannot be long before the king tires of him, as he tires of all things and casts him down to his dungeons or some place darker. You do wrong to mock him.
Her face was a child's thin, sad mumble. She said,
But that will never happen to you. Everyone loves you.
They had a moment to look at each other, the two women, the one fair and foreign in the cold, low room, the other appearing quite at home in such surroundings, an angry little beetle with her own kitchen beauty. Then they heard boots scraping, armor clicking, and the gusty voices of old men. King Haggard's 4 men-at-arms came trooping into the scullery. They were all at least 70 years old, gaunt and limping, fragile as crusted snow, but all clad from head to foot in King Haggard's miserly mail and bearing his wry weapons. They entered, hailing Molly Grew cheerfully and asking what she had made for their supper, but at the sight of the Lady Amalthea, all 4 became very quiet and bowed deep bows that made them gasp.
My lady, said the oldest of the men, command your servants. We are used men, spent men, but if you would see miracles, you have only to request the impossible of us. We will become young again if you wish it so.
His 3 comrades muttered their agreement, but the Lady Amalthea whispered in answer, No, no, you will never be young again. Then she flew from them, with her wild, blinding hair hiding her face and the satin gown hissing.
How wise she is, the oldest man-at-arms declared. She understands that not even her beauty can do battle with time. It is a rare, sad wisdom for one so young. That soup smells delicious, Molly. It smells too savory for this place, a second man grumbled as they all sat down around the table. Haggard hates good food. He says that no meal is good enough to justify all the money and effort wasted in preparing it. It is an illusion, says he, and an expense. Live as I do, undeceived.
Brah! He shuddered and grimaced, and the others laughed.
To live like Haggard,
said another man-at-arms as Molly spooned the steaming soup into his bowl.
That will be my fate in the next world if I don't behave myself in this one.
What do you stay in his service then?
Molly demanded. She sat down with them and rested her chin in her hands.
He
pays you no wages, she said, and he feeds you as little as he dares. He sends you out in the worst weather to steal for him in Hexgate. for he never spends a penny of the wealth in his strong room. He forbids everything, from lights to lutes, from fires to fairs and singing to sinning, from books and beer and talk of spring to games you play with bits of string. Why not leave him? What in the world is there to keep you here?
The four old men looked nervously at one another, coughing and sighing. The first said,
"It is our age. Where else would we go? We are too old to be wandering the roads, looking for work and shelter." "It is our age," said the young man-at-arms.
The second man-at-arms,
"When you are old, anything that does not disturb you is a comfort. Cold and darkness and boredom long ago lost their sharp edges for us, but warmth, singing, spring, no, they would all be disturbances. There are worse things than living like Haggard."
The third man said,
"Haggard is older than we are. In time Prince Lear will be king in this country, and I will not leave the world until I have seen that day. I have always been fond of the boy since he was small."
Molly found that she was not hungry. She looked around at the faces of the old men and listened to the sounds their seamy lips and shrunken throats made as they drank her soup. And she was suddenly glad that King Haggard always had his meals alone. Molly inevitably came to care for anyone she fed. Cautiously she asked them,
"Have you ever heard a tale that Prince Lear is not Haggard's adopted nephew at all?"
The man-at-arms showed no surprise at the question.
"Aye,"
The eldest replied,
"we know that story. It may well be true, for the prince certainly hears no family resemblance to the king. But what of it? Better a stolen stranger rule the land than a true son of King Haggard."
"But the prince was stolen from Hexgate,"
Moggy cried,
"that he is the man who will make the curse on this castle come true."
and she repeated the rhyme that the man Drin had recited in the inn at Hexgate.
"Yet none but one of Hexgate town may bring the castle swirling down."
But the old men shook their heads, grinning with teeth as rusty as their casques and corslets.
"Not Prince Lear,"
The third man said,
"The prince may slay 1,000 dragons, but he will level no castles, overthrow no kings. It is not in his nature. He is a dutiful son who seeks, alas, only to be worthy of the man he calls his father. Not Prince Lear. The rhyme must speak of some other." "And even if Prince Lear were the one," the second man added, "even if the curse had marked him for its messenger, still he would fail, for between King Haggard and any doom stands the Red Bull."
as silence sprang into the room and stood there, darkening all faces with its savage shadow, and chilling the good hot soup with its breath. The little autumn cat stopped purring on Molly's lap, and the thin cooking fire cowered him down. The cold scullery walls seemed to draw close together. The fourth man-at-arms, who had not spoken before, called across the dark to Molly Grew.
"There's true reason that we stay in Haggard's employ. He does not wish us to leave, and what King Haggard wishes or does not wish is the only concern of the Red Bull. We are Haggard's minions, but we are the Red Bull's prisoners."
Molly's hand was steady as she stroked the cat, but her voice was pinched and dry when she spoke.
"What is the Red Bull to King Haggard?"
It was the oldest man-at-arms who answered.
"We do not know. The bull has always been here. It serves Haggard as his army and his bulwark. It is his strength and the source of his strength. And it must be his one companion as well, for I am sure he descends to its lair betimes, down some secret stair. But whether it obeys Haggard from choice or compulsion, and whether the bull or the king is the master, that we never know."
The fourth man, who was the youngest, leaned toward Molly Grew, his pink, wet eyes suddenly eager. He said,
"The Red Bull is a demon, and its reckoning for attending Haggard will one day be Haggard himself.
Another man interrupted him, insisting that the clearest evidence showed that the bull was King Haggard's enchanted slave, and would be until it broke the bewitchment that held it and destroyed its former lord. They began to shout and spill their soup, but Molly asked, not loudly but in a way that made them all be still.
Do you know what a unicorn is? Have you ever seen one?
Of everything alive in the little room, only the cat and the silence seemed to look back at her with any understanding. The four men blinked and belched and rubbed their eyes. Deep, restless, the sleeping bull stirred again. The meal being over, the man-at-arms saluted Molly Grew and left the scullery. 2 for their beds, 2 to take up their night's vigil in the rain. The oldest of the men waited until the others were gone before he said quietly to Molly,
Be careful of the Lady Amalthea. When she first came here, her beauty was such that even this accursed castle became beautiful too, like the moon, which is only a shining stone. But she has been here too long. Now she is as beautiful as ever, but the rooms and roofs that contain her are somehow meaner for her presence.
He gave a long sigh, which frayed into a whine.
I am familiar with that kind of beauty, he said, but I had never seen that other sort before. Be careful of her. She should go away from you.
Alone, Molly put her face in the little cat's random fur. What? The cooking fire fluttered low, but she did not get up to feed it. Small, swift creatures scuttled across the room, making a sound like King Haggard's voice. And the rain rumbled against the castle walls, sounding like the Red Bull. Then, as though in answer, she heard the bull. His bellow scattered the stones under her feet, and she clutched desperately at the table to keep herself and the cat from plunging down to him. She cried out. The cat said,
He is going out. She goes out every sundown to hunt for the strange white beast that escaped him. You know that perfectly well. Don't be stupid.
The hungering roar came again, further away. Molly caught her breath and stared at the little cat. She was not as amazed as another might have been. These days she was harder to surprise than most women.
Could you always talk?
She asked the cat.
Or was it the sight of the Lady Amalthea that gave you speech?
The cat licked a front paw reflectively.
It was the sight of her that made me feel like talking,
he said at length.
And let us leave it at that. So that's a unicorn. She is very beautiful.
How do you know a unicorn? Molly demanded.
And why were you afraid to let her touch you? I saw you. You were afraid of her. I doubt that I will feel like talking for very long,
the cat replied without rancor.
I would not waste time in foolishness if I were you. As to your first question, no cat out of its first fur can ever be deceived by appearances. Unlike human beings who enjoy them. As for your second question...
Here he faltered, and suddenly became very interested in washing. Nor would he speak until he had licked himself fluffy and then licked himself smooth again. Even then he would not look at Molly, but examined his claws.
If she had touched me,
he said very softly,
I would have been hers and not my own, not ever again. I wanted her to touch me, but I could not let her. No cat will. We let human beings caress us because it is pleasant enough and calms them, but not her. The prince is more than a cat can pay.
Molly picked him up, and he purred into her neck for such a long while that she began to fear that his moment of speech had passed. But presently he said,
You have very little time. Soon she will no longer remember who she is, or why she came to this place. And the Red Bull will no longer roar in the night for her. It may be that she will marry the good prince who loves her.
The cat pushed his head hard into Molly's suddenly still hand.
Do that,
She commanded.
The prince is very brave to love a unicorn. A cat can appreciate the lion's absurdity.
No, Molly Groose said.
No, that cannot be. She is the last. Well, then she must do what she came to do,
The cat replied.
She must take the king's way round to the bull.
Molly held him so fiercely that he gave a mouse-like squeak of protest.
Do you know the way?
She asked, as eagerly as Prince Lear had demanded of her.
Tell me the way. Tell me where we must go.
She put the cat down on the table and took her hands off him. The cat made no answer. For a long time. But his eyes grew brighter and brighter, gold shivering down to cover the green. His crooked ear twitched and the black tip of his tail and nothing more.
When the wine drinks itself, he said, when the scar speaks and the clock strikes the right time, only then will you find the tunnel that leads to the Red Bull lair.
He tucked his paws under his chest and added,
There's a trick to it, of course. I bet,
Molly said grimly.
There's a horrible, grumbly old skull stuck up high on a pillar in the great hall, but it hasn't had anything to say for some time. The clock that stands nearby is mad and strikes when it pleases. Midnight every hour, 17 o'clock at 4, or perhaps not a sound for a week. And the wine, oh cat, wouldn't it be simpler just to show me the tunnel? You know where it is, don't you? Well, of course I know, answered the cat with a glinting, curling yawn. Of course it would be simpler for me to show you. Save a lot of time and trouble.
His voice was becoming a sleepy drawl, and Molly realized that, like King Haggard himself, he was losing interest. Quickly she asked him, Tell me one thing then. What became of the unicorns? Where are they? The cat yawned again. Near and far, far and near, he murmured. They are within sight of your lady's eyes, but almost out of reach of her memory. They're coming closer, and they're going away. He closed his eyes. Molly's breath came like rope, fretting against her harsh throat. Damn you! Why won't you help me? She cried. Why must you always speak in riddles? One eye opened slowly, green and gold as sunlight in the woods. The cat said, I am what I am. I would tell you what you want to know if I could, for you have been kind to me. But I am a cat, and no cat anywhere ever gave anyone a straight answer. His last few words drowsed away into a deep, regular purr, and he was asleep with the one eye partly open. Molly held him on her lap and stroked him, and he purred in his sleep, but he did not speak again. Chapter 11. Prince Lear came home 3 days after he set out to slay the maiden Fancying Oh. Chapter 11. Prince Lear came home 3 days after he set out to slay the maiden Fancying Ogre. With the great axe of Duke Alban slung behind him and the ogre's head bumping at his saddle-bow. He offered neither price to the Lady Amalthea, nor did he rush to find her with the monster's blood still brown on his hands. He had made up his mind, as he explained to Molly Grew in the scullery that evening, never more to trouble the Lady Amalthea with his attentions, but to live quietly in the thought of her, serving her ardently until his lonely death, but seeking neither her company, but seeking neither her company, her admiration, nor her love.
"I will be as anonymous as the air she breathes," he said, as invisible as the force that the holes are on the earth."
Thinking about it for a little, he added,
"I may write a poem for her now and then and slip it under her door, or just leave it somewhere for her to chance upon, but I won't ever sign the poem."
"It's very noble,"
Molly said. She felt relieved that the prince was giving up his courtship, and amused as well and somewhat sad.
"Girls like poems better than dead dragons and magic swords," she offered. "I always did anyway when I was a girl. The reason I ran off with Collie."
But Prince Lear interrupted her, saying firmly,
"No, do not give me hope. I must learn to live without hope as my father does, and perhaps he will understand each other at last."
He dug into his pockets and Molly heard paper crackling.
"Actually, I've already written a few poems about it. Hope and her and so on. You might look them over if you wanted to." "I'd be very pleased,"
Molly said.
"But will you never go out again then, to fight with black knights and ride through rings of fire?"
The words were meant teasingly, but she found as she spoke that she would have been a little sorry if it were so, for his adventures had made him much handsomer, and taken of a lot of weight, and given him besides a hint of the musky fragrance of death that clings to all heroes. But the prince shook his head, looking almost embarrassed.
"Oh, I suppose I'll keep my hand in," he muttered. "But it wouldn't be for the show of it, or for her to find out. It was like that at first, but you get into the habit of rescuing people, breaking enchantments, challenging the wicked duke in fair combat. It's hard to give up being a hero once you get used to it. Do you like the first poem?" "It certainly has a lot of feeling," she said. "Can you really rhyme bloomed and ruined?" "It needs a bit of smoothing out,"
Prince Lear admitted.
"Miracle's the word I'm worried about." "I was wondering about Greckle myself." "No, the spelling. Is it one R or two L's, or the other way round?" "One R anyway, I think," Molly said. Schmendrick, for the magician had just stalked through the doorway. "How many R's in Miracle?" "Two," he answered warily. "It has the same root as mirror."
Molly ladled him out a bowl of broth, and he sat down at the table. His eyes were hard and cloudy as jade, and one of the lids was twitching.
"I can't do this very much longer," he said slowly. "It isn't this horrible place, and it isn't having to be listening for him all the time. I'm getting rather good at that.
It's the wretched cheapjack flummery he has me perform for him. Hours on end, all night last night. I wouldn't mind if he asked for the real magic, or even for simple conjuring, but it's always the rings and the goldfish, the cards and the scarves, and the string exactly as it was in the Midnight Carnival. I can't do it. Not much more. Boy, that's the stuff that keeps you up all night, eh? Strong brewed coffee, brewed hot enough to burn your throat. If you haven't been awake before that, you certainly are after.
But that was what he wanted you for,
Molly protested.
If he wanted real magic, he'd have kept the old magician, that Mabruk.
Schmendrick raised his head and gave her a look that was almost amused.
I didn't mean it like that,
she said.
Besides, it's only for a little while, until we find the way to the Red Bull that the cat told me about.
She lowered her voice to a whisper as she spoke this last, and both of them glanced quickly over at Prince Lear. But he was sitting on a stool in the corner, evidently writing another poem. What a fucking idiot. Gazelle, he murmured, tapping his pen against his lips. Demoiselle, citadel, asphodel, philomel, parallel. He chose farewell and scribbled rapidly. I would just like to say something on that. Just because, I'm a little drunk now on whatever, on coffee, on life. I've tried winning over a woman with poetry and I fucking hated it. There's nothing more dishonest than writing poems to a woman. Because what kind of woman needs poems to keep her happy? That's not a woman, that's a little fucked up girl. And that's how you see Prince Lear talking. He's a little sad boy, nothing more. He's not a man, because he's whining and moping around on the ground. She doesn't love me. Like, what the fuck, man? Just be yourself, and if she likes you, she'll let you know. Otherwise, she'll never be interested in you. That's just the way it is. We will never find the way, Schmendrick said very quietly. Even if the cat told the truth, which I doubt, Haggard will make sure we never have time to investigate the skull and the clock. Why do you suppose he piles more work on you every day, if not to keep you from prowling and prying in the Great Hall? Why do you think he keeps me entertaining him with my carnival tricks? Why do you think he took me as his wizard in the first place? Molly, he knows, I'm sure of it, he knows what she is, though he doesn't quite believe it yet. But when he does, he'll know what to do. He knows, I see it in his face sometime. The lift of longing and the crash of loss, Prince Lear said. The bitterness of Tumpty-Umpty-Os, Cross-Boss-Moss. Damn! So the way it went with me, trying to win over a woman once, was that I got clearly very infuriated at first. And then I tried to be a bit softer. And then I wrote like really loving poem and like, oh, it's so nice and I love you and your breasts are like little turnips. Right? And then you do this kind of shit. And then she answers you and says, oh, thank you, I liked it very much. Yeah, but when you are the other version, she runs away from you, right? If you're not that, oh, I love you so much, you're so beautiful and you're
Your breasts are like little cherries on top of like little cupcakes.
Then she says, I don't like you anymore.
And see, yeah, sure. I mean, what did I get wrong? You know, I thought I loved a girl that pretended to be a princess that showers with, like, I don't know, rosy water and poops the smell of orchids or something. So I fell in love with a pretender, with somebody who acts like she is something which she is not. Because if you're trying to love somebody who only identifies themselves with their lightful side, it's fucking boring. Because they can never let go. They can never let go because they are clinging to the light, which means they live in a world of fear, in a state of fear. And as I walked my road, I learned to challenge fear. I challenged myself through my fears, which meant that pretentiousness pisses me off because it's dishonest. So I can't pretend to be like super nice because I'm not. I mean, you don't become some kind of warrior spirit, whatever. You don't go at night alone into the forest and face whatever darkness you have inside of you with psychedelic mushrooms or whatever you take. And then you go to a girl and write her loving poems. It just doesn't work like that. Because you don't have time for shit like this, right? You don't have time to run after women and give them the feeling that they are the best flower in the world, because believe it or not, they're not. Because if they would be, you wouldn't have to convince them, you know, that you're a man and that maybe, you know, there could be something cool in loving you. Right? So a real woman sees a real man and knows what to do. That's just how it is. No bullshit, no poems, no like fancy songs, no ribbons in the hair. Just like, I'm a man, you're a fucking woman, come and grab my balls. That's how it's supposed to be like. The women I've met were just full of shit. They were running around with their nose up in the air. I'm the best woman you'll ever have. But if you want me, you have to really show me. And that's the women who were really afraid of men and who were probably mistreated by men. Yeah, am I supposed to make up for that? Am I supposed to get all your shit in my face? Like, am I supposed to eat myself through your asshole to get to your heart? No, I don't think so, right? You know, I can do a bit of that, but at one point I'll be incredibly bored, because if you don't put in the work yourself, little girl, nobody's gonna want you ever. And that's okay, as long as you want yourself, right? But if you see a man, and that's just very well meant advice, if you see a man and that man likes boom, right? That man likes bam, knocks you over the head, and you have the feeling, holy shit, like that guy, I want to have him. Well, you better do something for that, because he ain't sitting around waiting for you. Anyway. Schmendrick leaned across the table. We can't stay here and wait for him to strike. The only hope we have is to escape at night, by sea perhaps. If I can lay hold of a boat somewhere, the man-at-arms will look the other way at the gate.
But the others, she cried softly. How can we leave when she has come so far to find the other unicorns? And we know they are here.
Yet one small, tender, treacherous part of her was suddenly eager to be convinced of the quest's failure. And she knew it, and was angry at Schmendrick.
Well, but what about your magic? She asked. What about your own little search? Are you going to give that up too? Will she die in human shape and you live forever? You might as well let the bull have her then.
The magician sank back. his face gone as pale and crumpled as a washerwoman's fingers. It doesn't really matter, one way or the other, he said, almost to himself. She's no unicorn now, but a mortal woman. Someone for that lout to sigh over and write poems about. Maybe... That's a good one. Someone for that lout to sigh over and write poems about. Then you know you're a bloody human if others are louting and sighing over you and write poems. And then you know, like, what's even a lout, right? It's a great word. Maybe haggard, maybe... Yeah, there's a German word and it's called Lauch. It means a leek, like the, spring onion, but a bit bigger and thicker. Probably like the black penis pendant to a white penis. And the German word is Lauch, and it means, there's not much to you. You're like a bit wobbly. And that seems a bit like the same kind of word, like a lout to sigh over and write poems about. Maybe Haggard won't find her out after all. She'll be his daughter and he'll never know. You see, that's funny. That's funny. That's how his speech ended. I cannot keep being serious about reading this book anymore. Because I just realized that the guy who wrote it wasn't really a man. He was a little boy. And that's okay, because the story is still great. But I like that there's a little humor in it, but the guy who wrote it was still a boy. And you can tell from the way he writes that he was a little boy. But the only reason I want to read this to the end is because I want to know how it ended. But I think what I have to do is I have to stop reflecting on everything that happens in this book onto me to understand what's happening in my life. But I can't stop it. It's impossible. I have to reflect. And that also comes from all kinds of stuff. He put his soup aside untasted and leaned his head into his hands. I couldn't change her back into a unicorn if we did find the others, he said. There's no magic in me. Schmendrick, she began, but at that moment he jumped to his feet and rushed out of the scullery, though she had not heard the king summon him. Prince Lear never looked up, but went on drumming meters and sampling rhymes. Molly hung a kettle over the fire for the sentry's tea. I've got it all but the final couplet, Lear said presently. Do you want to hear it now, or would you rather wait? Whichever you like, she said, so he read it then, but she never heard a word of it. Fortunately, the man-at-arms came in before he had finished reading, and he was too shy to ask her opinion in their presence. By the time they left, he was working on something else, and it was very late when he bade her good night. Molly was sitting at the table, holding her motley cat. The new poem was meant to be a sestina, and Prince Lear's head was jangling happily as he juggled the end words on his way up the stairs to his chamber. I will leave the first one at her door, he thought, and save the others until tomorrow. He was debating his original decision against signing his work and playing with such pen names as The Knight of the Shadows and Le Chevalier Melame, when he turned the corner and met the Lady Amalthea. She was coming down quickly in the dark, and when she saw him, she made a strange, bleating sound and stood still 3 steps above him. You see, so the problem is, sometimes you have to read the book almost till the end, until you realize what a fucking wimp that Prince Lear is. While he seems maybe valiant for slaying dragons, you also cannot help but realize that he's a fucking idiot and that the only reason he keeps slaying dragons is because he thinks he isn't worthy for that woman. While if he would have been the man already that he claims to be now, that he's seen that woman, he wouldn't have done any of that, of course. So in a way, he's also struggling to become the man that this woman can love, right? So of course it's an act of courage inspired by a beautiful woman, and that is then the essence of the dragon quest. There's most of the times, like, no hero wants to face the dragon unless there's like a beautiful woman waiting for him. That just seems to be the general thing. And so behind every great man is a woman doesn't mean that the woman necessarily does a lot, but she's just the inspiration, the muse. And the way I've had it in my life, you know, I cannot say that there's one specific woman. The way I see it is there's several women that have inspired me to become somebody better than who I used to be. Strong women. And it was more the realization that, you know, I wasn't good enough to be with any of them, although I wanted to be. And that inspired me to grow beyond myself so that when I would finally meet a woman that would say, you know, you are the man for me, you know, then I'd be ready. But then I also had to learn to stop clinging to women that I met in the past. Because a part of me, you know I want to be with a woman. I don't know yet, you know, in a way I'm thinking of, right, being together as a kind of a family. But I don't want to cling too much to that either, because I don't know yet. It depends on how my life turns out to be. And that's why at one point I had to let go of this fantasy of I have a wife, because I don't have one. And I had to make certain decisions and say, you know what? Maybe I will never have one. Maybe I will father children. But maybe not in the same sense that most men father children, that you have to stick around and change diapers. Maybe you can just father children and just be there, and the woman does all of that and you just do whatever you do, right? I mean, there's like so many things that can change. But in the end, it's a feeling. Right? Suddenly a woman stands before you and says, here I am, you know, will you answer my call? And you say, you know what, let's do it. But until that happens, you know, there's nothing for me to sit around waiting for. That's how I see it. She wore a robe that one of the king's men had stolen for her in Hagsgate. Her hair was down and her feet were bare, and the sight of her on the stairs sent such sorrow licking along Prince Lear's bones that he dropped his poems and his pretenses together and actually turned to run. What a fucking idiot. But to be honest, I get it. I have been running away from women most of my life. But not to just run away. I ran away to become stronger because I realized I wasn't ready for these women, for any of them. And there are 3 in particular where I have been tested very harshly. And yes, I can say I did run away from them, but they also ran away from me. It wasn't so much that I ran away from them, it was more like they ran away from me, because maybe I didn't have my shit together, but maybe they just weren't ready for me, right? Maybe they weren't ready for me, or maybe they weren't that great as they thought they would be. So in the end, it just didn't work out, right? But you know, I didn't run away and kept running away because I also had another goal, which was building my own life. And now I have to go take a shit. Maybe that ruins the story for you. But he was a hero in all ways, and he turned bravely back to face her, saying in a calm and courtly manner, Give you good evening, my lady." The lady Amalthea stared at him through the gloom. putting out a hand but drawing it back before she touched him. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Are you Reusch?"
"I'm Lear," he answered, suddenly frightened. "Don't you know me?"
But she backed away, and it seemed to the prince that her steps were as flowing as an animal's, and that she even lowered her head in the way of a goat or a deer. He said,
"I'm Lear."
"The old woman," said the Lady Amalthea. "The moon went out." She shivered once, and then her eyes recognized him. But all her body was still wild and watchful, and she came no nearer to him. "You were dreaming, my lady," he said, finding knightly speech again.
"I would that I might know your dream."
"I have dreamed it before," she answered slowly. "I was in a cage, and there were others, beasts in cages, and an old woman. But I will not trouble you, my lord prince. I have dreamed it many times before." She would have left him then, but he spoke to her in a voice that only heroes have, as many animals develop a certain call when they become mothers.
"A dream that returns so often is like to be a messenger, come to warn you of the future or to remind you of things untimely forgotten. Say more of this if you will, and I will try to riddle it for you."
Thereupon she halted, looking at him with her head a little turned, still with the air of some slim, furred creature peering out of a thicket. But her eyes held a human look of loss, as though she had missed something she needed, or suddenly realized that she had never had it. If he had even blinked, she would have been gone. But he did not blink, and he held her as he had learned to hold griffins and chimeras motionless with his steady gaze. Her bare feet wounded him deeper than any tusk or writhing talon ever had. But he was a true hero. The Lady Amalthea said, "In the dream there are black barred wagons and beasts that are and are not, and a winged being that clangs like metal in the moonlight. The tall man has green eyes and bloody hands."
"The tall man must be your uncle, the magician,"
Prince Lear mused.
"That part's clear enough anyway, and the bloody hands don't surprise me. I never cared much for his looks, if you'll pardon my saying so. Is that all the dream?"
"I cannot tell you all of it," she said. "It is never finished." Fear came back to her eyes like a great stone falling into a pool. All was clouded and swirling, and quick shadows were rushing everywhere. She said, "I am running away from a good place where I was safe, and the night is burning around me. But it is day too, and I am walking under beech trees in the warm, sour rain, and there are butterflies and a horny sound, a horny sound, yeah, and dappled roads and towns like fish bones, and the flying thing is killing the old woman. I am running and running into the freezing fire, however I turn, and my legs are the legs of a beast." "Lady," Prince Lear broke in,
"My lady, by your leave, no more."
Her dream was darkening into shape between them, and suddenly he did not want to know what it meant.
"No more," he said.
"But I must go on," said the Lady Amalthea, "for it is never finished. Even when I wake, I cannot tell what is real and what I am dreaming as I move and speak and eat my dinner. I remember what cannot have happened and forget something that is happening to me now. People look at me as though I should know them, and I do know them in the dream, and always the fire draws nearer though I am away."
"No more," he said desperately. "A witch built this castle, and to speak of nightmares here often makes them come true."
It was not her dream that chilled him, but that she did not weep as she told it. As a hero, he understood weeping women and knew how to make them stop crying. Generally, you killed something, but her calm terror confused and unmanned him, while the shape of her face crumbled the distant dignity he had been so pleased at maintaining. When he spoke again, his voice was young and stumbling.
"I would court you with more grace," he said, "if I knew how. My dragons and my feats of arms weary you, but they are all I have to offer. I haven't been a hero for very long, and before I was a hero I was nothing at all, nothing but my father's dull, soft son. Perhaps I am only dull in a new way now, but I am here, and it is wrong of you to let me go to waste. I wish you wanted something of me. It wouldn't have to be a valiant deed, just useful."
Sorry, I cannot keep this out. You know what, that fucking twit? All he had to do was listen to her. Just listen to her. But he couldn't do that. And I understand it. And it's funny because, in a way I've changed since all those experiences with those women. And of course I see myself as him in a way, which is good. If you recognize that part inside of you, you can work on it and let go of it. But that's the problem most men have, Maybe it's just, maybe they just have to listen. But they can't do that. They think they have to do something. They don't have to do that much. They just have to listen and hold her, because a woman, femininity is basically chaos. Like, if you don't understand that, you have to learn something about spirit. What's male and what's female, what's masculine, what's feminine. The masculine, the rational side, the light. Femininity is the dark side, it's the chaos. And that's why women are very close to madness. And that's why if they get together with a man, they need the man to hold them, so that they can raise a child and not strangle it in its sleep because, it was crying too loudly. These things happen. For that, the man has to give stability to the woman so that the woman has the strength to feed her offspring. Then the Lady Amalthea smiled at him for the first time since she had come to stay in King Haggard's castle. It was a small smile like the new moon, a slender bend of brightness on the edge of the unseen. But Prince Lear leaned toward it to be warm. You see, that's the mistake. Instead of him leaning towards her to be warm in her smile, she should be leaning towards him to feel safe in his presence. So he calls himself a hero, but he is no hero. He's a little boy that craves for a mother because he's never had one. You see, he's never been loved by the man that took him, Prince Haggard. Who's like very haggard. He has nothing to give. Is a greedy old fuck. And he hates everything, including Prince Lear. So yeah, Prince Lear is just a lost little boy that's waiting for Peter Pan to carry him away. And even Peter Pan was an unloved child because he needed Wendy to pretend to be some kind of mother. He would have cupped his hands around her, smiled and breathed it brighter if he had dared. "Sing to me," she said. "That would be valiant, to raise your voice in this dark, lonely place. And it will be useful as well. Sing to me, sing loudly. Drown out my dreams, keep me from remembering whatever wants me to remember it. Sing to me, my Lord Prince, if it please you. It may not seem a hero's task, but I would be glad of it. So Prince Lear sang out lustily. There on the cold stairway, and many damp unseen creatures went flopping and scurrying for cover before the daylight gaiety of his voice. He sang the first words that came to him, and they were these. When I was a young man and very well thought of, I couldn't ask aught that the ladies denied. I nibbled their hearts like a handful of raisins, and I never spoke love, but I knew that I lied. But I said to myself, they none of them know the secret I shelter and savor and save. I wait for the one who will see through my seeming, and I'll know when I love by the way I behave. The years drifted over like clouds in the heavens. The ladies went by me like snow on the wind. I charmed and I cheated, deceived and dissembled, and I sinned and I sinned and I sinned and I sinned. But I said to myself, they none of them see? There's part of me pure as the whisk of a wave. My lady is late, but she'll find I've been faithful, and I'll know when I love by the way I behave. At last came a lady both knowing and tender, saying, you're not at all what they take you to be. I betrayed her before she had quite finished speaking, and she swallowed cold poison and jumped in the sea. And I say to myself when there's time for a word, as I gracefully grow more debauched and depraved, our love may be strong, but habit is stronger, and I knew when I loved by the way I behaved. The Lady Amalthea laughed when he was done, and that sound seemed to set the old darkness of the castle hissing back from them both. That was useful, she said. Thank you, my lord. I don't know what I sang that one. Why, I sang that one, Prince Lear said awkwardly. One of my father's men used to sing it to me. I don't really believe it. I think that love is stronger than habit or circumstances. I think it is possible to keep yourself for someone for a long time and still remember why you were waiting when she comes at last. Fuck. You see, that's about like the truth that's staring you in the fucking face. You know, when I talk about, I have a wife, I have no wife. I love a woman, I love no woman. Right? And then I listen to this and I think, fuck, maybe it's her after all. Maybe I've been trying to run away from her, and maybe she's just chasing me across the fucking world because she knows that I'm it. But I don't know I'm it until she shows it to me, because I know my worth. She has to know her worth. Right? Because that's just how it is. And my self-worth basically demands me to wait for her. You see, sometimes I go to places and I meet people. Like sometimes I go somewhere and meet a woman and I think, whoa, maybe it's her then, right? But then life happens and suddenly I run out of money and I can't go to the boulder hall anymore and meet that one. And then I think, damn it. Well, what does that mean? I need more money. What does that mean? I go back home and record this thing. Because I also said I'm not gonna work for anybody anymore. The Lady Amalthea smiled again, but she did not answer, and the prince took a single step closer to her. Marveling at his own boldness, he said softly, I would enter your sleep if I could. What a rapist. And guard you there, yeah. And slay the thing that haunts you. As I would if I had the courage to face me in fair daylight. If it had the courage to face me in fair daylight. But I cannot come in unless you dream of me. That's such a wimp, that fucking idiot. He should just stop talking and just hug her or something. Before she could speak, if she meant to, they heard footsteps below them on the winding stair, and King Haggard's veiled voice saying,
I heard him singing. What business had he to be singing?
Then Schmendrig, the royal wizard, his own voice meek and hurried, Sire, it was but some heroic lay, some chanson de geste, such as he often sings when he rides out to glory or rides home to renown. Be assured, your majesty.
He never sings here, the king said. He sings continuously on his fool's wanderings, I am sure, because that is what heroes do. But he was singing here not of battle and gallantry either, but of love. Where is she? I knew he was singing of love before I ever heard him, for the very stones shuddered as they do when the bull moves in the earth. Where is she?
The prince and the lady Amalthea looked at each other in the darkness. And in that moment they were side by side, though neither moved. With this came fear of the king for whatever had been born between them. It might be something he wanted. A landing above them gave onto a corridor. They turned and ran together, though they could not see beyond their breath. Her feet were as silent as the promise she had given him. But his own heavy boots rang exactly like boots on the stone floor. King Haggard made no pursuit, but his voice rustled down the hallway after them, whispering under the magician's words, Mice, my lord, beyond a doubt, fortunately, I am possessed of a singular spell.
Let them run, the king said. It suits me well that they should run.
When they stopped running wherever they stopped, they looked at each other again. So the winter whined and crept along, not toward any spring, but toward the brief, devouring summer of King Haggard's country. Life in the castle went on in the silence that fills a place where no one hopes for anything. Molly Grew cooked and laundered, scrubbed stone, mended armor, and sharpened swords. She chopped wood, milled flour, groomed horses, and cleaned their stalls, melted down stolen gold and silver for the king's coffers, and made bricks without straw, and in the evenings before she went to bed she usually read over Prince Lear's new poems to the Lady Amalthea, and praised them and corrected the spelling. Schmendrig fooled and juggled and flim-flammed as the king bade him, hating it and knowing that Haggard knew he hated it and took his pleasure thereby. He never again suggested to Molly that they escape from the castle before Haggard made sure of the truth of the Lady Amalthea. But he no longer sought to discover the secret way down to the Red Bull, even when he was allowed time to himself. He seemed to have surrendered, not to the king, but to some far older, crueler enemy that had caught up with him at last. The winter in this place. The Lady Amalthea grew as much more beautiful every day as that day was grimmer and gloomier than the one before. The old men-at-arms, coming down drenched and shivering from walking their posts in the rain or in from stealing things for the king, opened as quietly as flowers when they met her on the stairs or in the hallways. She would smile at them and speak gently, But when she had passed by, the castle always seemed darker than ever, and the wind outside would rattle the thick sky like a sheet on a clothesline. For her beauty was human and doomed, and there was no comfort in it for old men. They could only draw their dripping cloaks tighter and limp on down to the small fire in the scullery. But the Lady Amalthea and Prince Lear walked and spoke and sang together as blithely as though King Haggard's castle had become a green wood, wild and shadowy with spring. They climbed the crooked towers like hills, picnicked in stone meadows under a stone sky, and splashed up and down stairways that had softened and quickened.
What is